This is absolutely critical. And I want you to put yourself in the position of a single mother with 2 children. And she has been invited to come to church with a friend. Or maybe she just drove by the church. So let's just stop and think a second. Why would she be looking for a church?
Sunday school for the kids.
What's that?
Sunday school for the kids.
Sunday school for the kids. What else?
To give a family to kids. To give a family to
Oh,
kids.
to give a family to kids, to have a broader sense of connection with the community. Why else?
Maybe to meet other single moms.
Yep, absolutely, to make friends. Studies show the #1 reason that people are looking for a church is to make friends. Pastors, that may not be the answer you wanted to hear, but it's the truth. It's the truth. They want to make friends. And this is not an evil thing. We should honor this. How do we help them to make friends? But here's the deal. It is very easy, I have done this myself, to walk into a church on a Sunday morning and talk to nobody from here to the pew. Maybe I get handed a bulletin by an usher who is having a conversation with somebody else or won't give me eye contact for whatever reason. And I end up in the pew and I sit through an entire service and then afterwards I get up and leave and maybe I catch the pastor's handshake on the way out the door, maybe not, and then I'm in my car and I go. In other words, the very thing that I came for I did not get. I got no interactivity with people. I went to a Methodist church one time when we were on vacation, and I'll tell you what, the most lonely moment for me during that service was the passing of the peace, which should have been the most interactive moment, quite frankly. But we were sitting there, and this is a big church, and nobody came over and passed the peace with us. It was a fascinating thing. Well, I'm an extrovert, not a problem. I go over to other people too, and there's this kind of group of people right here, and it's kind of like this. And I said, peace of the Lord be with you. And the person turned around and went, oh, peace be with you. And then turned back around to the kept talking about the game or whatever they were talking about, Diana. The next thing then is for your evangelism team to be asking the question, how are we going to make sure that greeting happens? There have to be really kind of two strategies here. One is to have greeters that are not the ushers. And this goes to what I was saying during the opening about creating a new system rather than trying to reform the old one. If you try to go in and change the way the ushers have been doing things for the last 30 years, good luck with that, all right? Call me, I'll come to your funeral. But I think what's easier to do is to create a completely new group of people who have no responsibilities that the ushers have, all these kinds of things that they've been doing since the Pleistocene era. And but all they have to do is greet people. A smile and a handshake, and the hospitality begins in the parking lot. The visitors should not have to touch a door handle at any point. If they have to open the door themselves, then there's probably not a greeter anywhere near, or the greeter's hiding behind the door and waiting for them to open the door before they say hello like that. You put your greeters out on the porch, get them out there, have them open the door, show the kind of hospitality you would show to someone at your house if they were to come, right? Now you might wait for them to knock on the door, but you would open the door for them and you would greet them and you would show them to their place and so forth. We don't do this so well. So when I say greeters, I don't mean somebody with a big button on that says greeter. These could be stealth greeters.
We shouldn't have buttons that have greeters.
I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think the greeting can happen afterwards as well too. So there are a couple, that means you have to be able to identify the visitor. Well, I was saying two-pronged approach. Let me back up and say the second is to get every member of the congregation engaged in the greeting process, which is going to take some pastoral teaching, and it's going to take some efforts on the part of the evangelism team too, to help people recognize that they need to welcome visitors as well too, which means you have to identify the visitors without shaming them, which is really, really hard. How do you identify who's a visitor in your church without saying, would all the visitors please stand up? You know, and in a small congregation, you can get away with that, but in a congregation like this, you can't do that. You'd be there for hours, right, quite frankly. And it's a good thing, because most people do not want to be embarrassed that way. They're terrified to go to church. Imagine that you were going to visit a Mormon church or a mosque. Okay? Somebody invites you and you say yes. First of all, you're going to want to drive separately so that you can leave if it gets weird. Right? Secondly, I mean, think about it. This is the way people view the church. Secondly, you're going to want to sit in the back because I don't want to be embarrassed. The worst thing in the world is that visitors sit up in front and the communion starts and you're supposed to know what to do. And what's going on? There's wine? What do I do? You know, now I'm going to be embarrassed in front of everybody because I clearly don't know what to do. So what we have to do is find a way to identify these folks and support them as they come in the door and feel comfortable. Which may be several different things. Those of you that have name tags in your congregation, obviously somebody that doesn't have a name tag could be identified as a visitor. That's one way to do it. One pastor that I worked with for a number of years used to do this. I don't think I would do this anymore, but this is what he would do. Is he would say, if you're a member of the church, please stand up. and then everybody else stand up too, and they would all stand up. It was very, very quick. But the members learned very quickly that those who were still sitting were the visitors. And he had trained them earlier to, if you see somebody sitting, that's the visitor, go over to them and say hello. And it was kind of common parlance that you darn well better say hello to the visitors, because the pastor was going to ask the visitors, how many people said hello to you? And report back to the congregation how friendly or unfriendly they were. Most congregations perceive themselves to be friendly. Almost every congregation I go to says, what I love about our church, we're the friendliest church in the whole world. But our worship attendance has been declining steadily over the last 30 years. What's that all about? You know, I mean, in other words, they feel friendly to each other, but outsiders do not perceive them as friendly. It's like that little clique in the Methodist church I visited, Christine. The greeting is critical. The hospitality is critical. We do hospitality in our churches that none of us would do in our homes to people. I mean, you would not serve people coffee out of styrofoam cups out of 25-year-old coffee cans at your home. Would you do that? Would any of you do that? Heck no. It's just kind of an amazing thing. But that's what we do. Or we'll decorate our churches with these crosses. I mean, we do better decorating of our homes than we do of our churches. It's important that you get information. And I want to come to this in a second, so I want to ask you to put your question on hold, because one of the keys to post-visit engagement, whether they visit a small group or a worship service or a concert, is collecting all the names so that you can make a contact with these folks. This is absolutely critical. If this doesn't happen, in most cases, you're going to drop the ball. You're not going to welcome new visitors. And I had to learn this the hard way. So in order to do this call, you've got to find a way to gather information. And there's some people who want to worship anonymously, and they will not give you this information at first, but you have to have multiple ways to collect it. So let me come back to this in a second. First of all, hospitality. They walk in the door. So I know you don't like the idea of a Starbucks in your lobby, but let's face it, having decent coffee might not be a bad idea. Now, I think that there's a whole question. If you do something like this, you're charging, which you wouldn't want to charge guests for coffee. But I'll tell you what, in a lot of the churches that are attracting younger people, they have this. And so somebody said to me, you could up the number of first-time visitors by 5% by having a Starbucks. I would have a Starbucks. I would do it. Let me tell you, I'm not above that. What's going to increase my first-time visitors by 5%? Just tell me what to do. You know, you want me to wear a clown suit? Okay, I'm in. You know, because my goal is to introduce people to a relationship with God and God's people. And if you know, there's no place in the Bible that forbids Starbucks that I'm into. The church was here. The sanctuary was right here. Here's the parking lot, right? Here's the fellowship hall where the coffee was being served at the time. I don't know what they're doing now. And so people had to walk by their car on a cold day or on a hot day to get to fellowship. And getting them there was a real challenge. And we had to have stealth greeters to get them there a lot of the times. And this is a real challenge. For a while we tried this. It was really hard to keep it staffed, but to have some kind of coffee service there, because when people come out of church, if there's a place to sit, they will stay for a lot longer, and then relationships will develop, which is what we want to have happen in the long run. If there's not, then you're really kind of in trouble. If there's no way to...
If Starbucks did your model, they'd go out of business.
What's that?
If Starbucks did that model, they'd go out of business.
They would go out of business. Right. Absolutely they would. Absolutely they would. Another way of identifying visitors is the pastor. In most cases, most of our pastors will be able to tell you who the visitors are and aren't. And so I would stand oftentimes at the door of the sanctuary greeting people. And if I saw somebody who I knew was a visitor, and boom, they're headed their car, right? They can see their car. I've got maybe 20 seconds to connect this person with somebody, and if nobody's saying hello to them, I was oftentimes going, and it helps to have some stealth greeters that you know are trained greeters who are right there, that I could just kind of go, like that, and boom, they would head right over to that person and say, hey, how you doing? Hey, what brought you to worship today? Hey, would you like to come have a cup of coffee with me? Or if it's an early service, invite them to the adult class that's happening. They may say no. Pedro?
Yeah, I was going to say, experience that I've had. When we first got here a year ago, we would visit churches. You know, my wife and I. You know, things were pretty cool. In some occasions, they would welcome us really cool, especially when they see we're Latino and then we speak English. And then all of a sudden, we know the liturgy and we know the hymns, and then immediately they would jump on us, and then they want us for the choir or whatever. And so like, no, we just came here to visit, you know. So we have to watch out that, you know, we don't overwhelm the visitors with too much sugar, because they can drive them away. And then the experience changed when then it was me by myself visiting churches, and I'm a Latino, and I usually, if I don't have to preach or do something in the service, I will not go with a collar or anything. And you'll be surprised. And I went to one church that I was like really not welcome at all. I did not feel welcome from the beginning until the very end, when the pastor recognized who I was and introduced me to the congregation. But then they were very embarrassed. But then but I got to tell you, there was one church. Well, there's several churches that I've gone, and they have been properly doing all the stuff that the bishop is saying. You know, I did not open the door from the back. They welcomed me. They showed me where I was supposed to go. And people that sat next to me said hello, introduced themselves, and they were not pushy, and they were just like smiling, and it was very good. So it can be done. It can be done. And by the way, there are some people also that go to church, honestly, wanting to date. Because some people say, like, you know, if I want to find a date, I'd rather go to a church and then going to a bar.
I had people that left, I remember people that left Grace because they were single and they said, I really want to meet someone. This church is so small, there aren't that many single people here. I'm going to go to the church down the road, even though they had theological qualms with that church because it was bigger, it was more active, they had singles ministry and so forth going on. So I mean, that's a reality, it's a challenge. In terms of hospitality, you're absolutely right. A cafe table is much more welcoming than we have. Why do we have square tables at all? I mean, it really doesn't make sense to me. I've never quite understood why we got square tables. They are terrible for community, ultimately. So thinking through your space. Think about the kind of spaces that we create in our society today. And again, you're back to Starbucks again. We're talking small tables where people can interact with one another face-to-face and not be 5 miles across the table from the other person, or have to talk to someone like this who's on their left or on their right and so forth. We've got to create places for people to be able to interact and meet with each other, and that means making sure our hospitality. So this means that you've got to deal with your fellowship committee or whoever does hospitality and get them thinking creatively. When I went to the Lone Star Cowboy Church, I walked in, and they used their square table for fellowship. Actually, what they did is they had these huge things of iced tea out there, and large tumbler-sized cups with ice in them that you can. And I thought about it for a second. You know, there's a lot of people that don't drink coffee. Think about how many people drink iced tea in Texas. Holy smokes! You know, and they charge you $2.50 for an iced tea. I mean, it's just kind of an amazing thing. You know, you walk in the door and there's an iced tea that might be more welcoming than even a cup of coffee. I mean, think deeply about why are we doing it the way we're doing it? It's because we've always done it. Well, maybe that's not the best way to do it, you know? And so this means working with your fellowship team, training greeters, training your greeters so they know what to do, how, you know, to first of all, how to enter into a conversation with somebody that's just visited. We'll talk about that in just a minute because it's the same kind of conversation that you're going to have over here when you follow up with them. And then making sure that you have a way to ID the visitors. Am I ready to go there? Oh, information center. Getting back to what Emmanuel was saying, every church, narthex, needs to have an information center with a person behind it, even if it's just a tiny little table that has pamphlets about whatever it is that you're doing in the world, and people will come to you and they'll ask where the bathroom is and they'll ask where the nursery is. Can people find the nursery? Can people find the nursery? I mean, it's great if you have a nursery, but if it's hidden back in the back building and the visitor can't find it and there's no good signs, I mean, signage is very, very important. But it's also good, if there's a person standing there, yeah, I'll take you to the nursery. And if your nursery's in another building, then you're really something. You know, I mean, that can be a real challenge. Now, in a lot of the growing non-denominational churches, we could learn from them. I'm not saying we follow their theology, but we could learn a few things from them, right? A lot of them will have separate buildings for the kids during worship. So you can make a separate building situation work, but you have got to have an entry point. They have to have confidence that their children are being watched. We went to a church one time, and we took, this was when John was little, and we walked in, and it was one person sitting alone in the room. There were no kids there yet, and it was only a one adult. They didn't have a 2-adult rule. You should always have 2 adults. And I said, no, leaving John with a stranger all by herself in this creepy room. Sorry, I'm not doing it. I've got to think about this stuff.
Sometimes, does the nursery discourage people from coming with children? I mean, we don't have a nursery, and at first it drove me crazy. The kids are like sort of everywhere. They're running around, they're doing stuff, they're playing with the toys, but the kids are part of that family. And we have grandparents who come and bring little kids now. You know, and sometimes the children's message has to do with the soccer balls. It's the only time Michelle gets them to stop playing soccer, to give them to her so she can tell them a story. But, but I mean, do we discourage people by having a nursery? Some people think it's a good thing.
For bringing children to worship?
Yeah, or families from coming, yeah. Or my child's not welcome in there.
Yeah, there's 2 different philosophies about that, and I'm not going to argue them, but I'll just tell you what they are. One is, you absolutely need to have children in worship, because worshiping with the family is a key to faith development, and I think that's absolutely right. The other is that having children in worship means the pastor can't talk about dicey issues, rated R issues, you know.
True.
So how are we going to deal with the fact that a member of the church got arrested for child pornography? Maybe, okay, worship is not the right place to deal with that question. Okay. But there are other kinds of questions that will come up, you know, like the Ethiopian eunuch, where you want to be able to have a frank conversation with the congregation.
Yeah.
You can't because there are children in the room. And so I think that a lot of our churches are kind of playing both sides of the fence at the same time, saying, you know what, we know that right now the churches that are growing are the ones where the children worship in a different space than the adults do, and the children's worship is developmentally aimed at the children.
Yeah, we do have
most of our worship is way over the head.
Yeah.
Way. So you do a children's sermon. It's almost like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. It's like a freak show in a sense in some of our congregations, where the pastor is really preaching to the congregation, and aren't these children cute?
We do have a children's time. During the sermon, they go someplace else.
Well, exactly, and that's a very old pattern in the U.S.
Yeah.
It used to be you excused the children after the first part of the service, and they went and
Yeah, we do that.
So
but other than that, they're in the room with their soccer balls and their
for those who bring their kids to church, it's a good idea to have stuff. I noticed they have Spark Bibles in the pews here at this church. I thought that was really cool. But I think having a good nursery is going to make it or break it for attracting young people to your church. When I came to my last church, there was mold underneath the carpet. You could smell it when you walked in there. I said, this smells bad. When I called the visitors, they told me it smelled bad. I mean, we had to change that in order to attract young families. They were not going to leave their children. And there weren't cribs, and there weren't high chairs, and there weren't changing tables. So who's going to bring, I mean, gosh, McDonald's knows better than that. I mean, you know, it's like we were supposed to be the family place. You know, it just strikes me as curious. Okay, I need to hit worship, IDing visitors, and then move on to this last section. Worship. Is the sermon directed to people who don't know the church lingo? Are we using words like evangelism and stewardship in the sermon that people who have never gone to church are going to go, huh? What's that? Could this sermon be preached on 1st and Main? This is the challenge I used to ask myself over and over again. And I failed constantly, but you know, think about this. Could you preach that sermon on the corner of 1st and Main in the town where you live? And would people understand what the heck you're talking about? And would it move them to the depths of their being? You know, Jesus had a public ministry and that attracted people, and they weren't all Pharisees. You know? I mean, in fact, the Pharisees got upset with him, but he was talking to the people. Luther said, I preach to the children and the handmaidens, and if the doctors of the church don't like it, the door is open. One of the many things that got him in deep trouble. I mean, we have a responsibility to make the gospel known in the vernacular. So the sermon is absolutely critical. It's the music. You know, I mean, I love Beautiful Savior. It's one of my favorite hymns. It taps me into a life of faith. Beautiful Savior ain't cutting it for the unchurched 25-year-old. I'm sorry. It's not singing his heart song. But the reality is we don't give a hoot about the 25-year-old unchurched person. All I want is my beautiful Savior. And if you don't sing it, I'm going to get right a letter to the pastor. You know? I mean, this makes me mad. Our churches give more, they care more about who's sitting in front of them than the unchurched. And I think it's almost like they're telling the rest of the world they can go to hell. I mean, literally and figuratively, I don't know. This is absolutely critical. Think about your worship. So this means now you've got to interact with the fellowship team and with the worship team as well too. And that's, everybody knows what a challenge that might be. But starting to engage them in conversation about some things that we can do in worship that are going to make worship more accessible to unchurched people. And I could spend another 2 hours talking about that topic alone. We could sit and brainstorm and really hit that alone. What I'd like to do is some of this online, because this is not just a one-day conversation. This is going to have to be an ongoing conversation. What are the things that we can do to make you worship more user-friendly? I'll give you one example. I married a Methodist. She loves the Lutheran Church. She loves communion every Sunday. But the first couple years of our marriage, she said, I cannot navigate this hymnal. These hymnals, there was like 2 or 3 hymnals in the pew, and a bulletin and 95 things that fell out of the bulletin when we started. She said, I don't know what to do. And I'm a church person. How does an unchurched person navigate the service? You know, and so we started printing everything in the bulletin. To waste a ton of paper to do it. Now with projectors, there's different ways. Instead of killing trees, we're mining precious metals from the earth. But you know, hey, there's got to be other ways to do this to make the service as accessible as possible. And honestly, and I believe this in my heart of hearts, this is where our liturgy works against us to some extent. We have this beautiful gift of liturgy, but when we complexify it, when we approach liturgy like we have to throw everything in, including the kitchen sink. Or here's another thing that happens: the church all of a sudden needs a new musician, and they go looking for an organist. But maybe you're in a small town, you can't find an organist, so you go get the Baptist piano player from down the road who sits at the organ. She doesn't know how to play the organ, so now she's playing this bad electronic organ, trying to do a liturgy that doesn't make sense to her or to the congregation, quite frankly. And meanwhile, there's 3 guys sitting in the congregation that play guitar in a country western band on Friday nights. You know, I mean, let's think context. I mean, I'm an organist. I'm not trashing organ music. I'm an organist, but it's like that person who said to me, I don't like organ music. Can I still be a Christian? Right? Because when she heard organ music, you know what she thought? Haunted house. Yeah, for me, organ music reminds me of Vitor's Toccata on Easter. And thine is the glory, and for all the saints, with that walking pedal line and so forth. But for her, she thought da 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 da. You know, context. Sorry. All right. Quickly, how do we identify the visitors? So somebody mentioned pew pads are one way that we do it. Tear-offs might be the easiest way to do it. That is your bulletin. You can get perforated paper for your bulletin that has a little welcome thing. Not everybody will do it, but some will do it, right? You've got a guest book. I think that's still a good thing, especially if you've got somebody in to invite people to sign it. Of course, if you invite a long-term member to sign it, they'll probably be upset, but that's okay. Also, and this is one that was taught to me by the pastor, one of the pastors of Lord of Life in the Woodlands. He said, when somebody writes a check and drops it in the offering plate, you got them. You got them. You got a name, you got an address, you got a ton of stuff, so you got to get your counters. So now you got to talk to your finance committee or your counters or whatever and say, on Sunday after you count, if you've got names that you don't recognize, maybe pass them on to the evangelism team, because we're going to be calling these folks. Yes, absolutely. What are other ways that you could collect names?
Look us up on Facebook.
Facebook, man, people are so easy to find
You
today.
can just
It's
Google a
easier than
name.
ever. You can
Yeah.
Google.
Yeah, but if you have something in your bulletin or anywhere, it says look us up on Facebook. Once they look to like you, you got contact.
Yes. So on your tear off, you ask for all the information. They may only give you a piece or two, but you take whatever you can get, right?
We have a Facebook check mark on our card now.
Nice.
We have a little Facebook, it just says check.
Yeah.
If I'm on it, I'm on it.
I mean, that's a great way to start. Also, put a prayer request on your card, because somebody may say, I'm not filling out that thing, they're just trying to gather my information. But they might have a prayer request, and they'll say, you know what, I'd love it if you would pray for my mother who is battling cancer right now. And this gives you something to talk about of substance when you make that phone call, rather than, are you going to join our church? Which, we'll talk about that in a second. But you have to have at least somebody that's caring enough to gather this information, which is going to be your evangelism team or a subset of your evangelism team, the pastor. I would, when people came through the line, I saw somebody new, and I would say, oh, hi, my name's Mike, have we met? And I'd shake hands, and I would say, or I would say, my name's Mike, or something like that, and they would inevitably introduce themselves, and as soon as they walk away, this is everything I can remember down on my bulletin, because there were enough people coming through the line that on Monday morning my brain was erased, but I could pull out that bulletin, and there it was.